Guantanamo. And you know, I'll get more into the background and history of prison, but I just wanted to kind of start my talk off by showing a video. It's 10 minutes long. It's a video about one of our clients who recently was released, actually in 2016. And you know, the reason I want to start with this short documentary, this short video, is that you know, Guantanamo is shrouded in so much secrecy. There's so little information in the public about what the prison is, and especially when it comes to the men who are detained there. There's a regime set up to where very little information about who these men are is allowed to get out. And I think, you know, in the work that we do at CCR, one of the things that we think is so important is to allow these men to share their stories and to share you know, their experiences, because a lot of the time when we hear about these men in the news, they're treated as numbers. They're treated as people who don't have any kind of stories beyond what the government says they do. So this documentary that was made following kind of one of our clients, and particularly kind of looking at his family. He's Yemeni, so it's looking at his family back in Yemen and how they are dealing with the ordeal of him being detained in Guantanamo for over 14 years. So I'll start with this and then jump into my presentation.
الكتب التي درسها آخر سنة أو الثالثة الثانوي لم نخرجها بالمكان الذي كان يذاكر فيه. تجد هنا تركناها هذه من أجل تكون ذكريات متجددة في كل وقت، كلما نراها أو كلما ندخل ذلك المكان نراها أمامنا فنتذكر. السافر أخي يمكن أخي فهد بعد أن سافر من عندنا يمكن حوالي شهرين ما جاءنا لا اتصال ولا رسالة. عندما أرسل لنا رسالة، عندما أرسل أخي فهد رسالة من هناك أول مرة أسمع بحاجة اسمها قلت اسمي محمد عبد الله أحمد غازي، عمري 44 سنة. فهد هو أخي وشقيقي وهو بعدي يعني حوالي 6 سنوات.
Fahd is from a small village about 3 hours from Sana'a in Yemen called Benghazi. It's an idyllic mountain town, agrarian culture based around farming and religion and family. Fahd Ghazi was one of the first men to arrive in Guantanamo. He was just a few months past his high school graduation. He was 17 years old at the time. He's been detained at Guantanamo for 12 years. He's almost 30 years old now. He was cleared for release by President Bush in 2007, cleared again by President Obama in 2009.
عندنا أول صدمة لا كانت أول صدمة عندنا الدولة فقط قالوا أنه يريد أن عبد الله بن غازي يبين وكل غير عايش سنة لا تدرك لو أنا الولد الذي كان عندي بس كان كان تعصب كان يقول يا الله يا الله يا الله تكفيني عقلي يجي يحتاج المحيط النفسي لأنه نزل
على أن يذهب في السجن يتحمل ويصبر ويكون راضيا بذلك الأمر الذي هو فيه من ابتلاء السجن والاعتقال بهذه الفترة الطويلة يجير على نفسه والاطمئنان وقوة العزيمة هو أننا أنا وفهد تربينا في القرية كنا نذهب المدرسة بعيدة عن الفتن فيها خير وفيها تعليم وفيها غير ذلك من هذه الأمور التي تغرس في نفس الطفل.
هذا رجل طالب من طلاب الذي درسنا درسته منذ الصف الثالث الأساسي إلى الصف الثاني الثانوي، وكان من أحسن الطلاب، بل ربما كان الأول على الدفعة. كان الأول في التحصيل العلمي، وفهد أحببناه كثيرا.
Every prominent national security agency in the U.S. government has unanimously declared that he can be in Guantanamo. That's the FBI, the CIA, the Office of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All of the agencies that American citizens rely on to keep them safe have determined that Fahd can't go home. But because the Obama administration has refused to repatriate Yemenis or resettle them in third countries, he's trapped almost entirely because of his citizenship.
أنا جاءني خبر أن أخيك سيطلق صراحة قريبا، وكنت في الساعة الثالثة قبل الفجر. فلما وصلني الخبر هذا من كثر السعادة خلاص النوم راح من عيوني، كأنه عندما سمعنا بأنه سيخرج كان عندنا مع والدتي أو بقرة، وعندها مولود البقرة هذا العجل أو ما يسمى في هذا التسيير، فقمنا بأن ذلك العجل أو الأشياء التي أعطيناه لحاجتنا وخلت الحاجة الماسة، وأصابنا شيء من اليأس أنه ما سيخرج في ذلك. عندما انعكست الامور بعد ذلك بعد تفاجأنا بانه هذا الخبر ليس له من الصحه وانما هي وعود ليس الا، فحسينا باشياء كانه تعذيب نفسي لنا ولجميع العائله وكذلك لكل من يسمع هذا الخبر.
During our meetings, Fahd has tried to explain to me the toll it's taken on him to have been cleared so many times and to have his hopes dashed. He brings reams of letters to our meetings to show me passionate, loving letters to his family, thanking his wife for being so patient, comparing his daughter with the return of her father. He's prepared for his release down to every last detail, meeting with older prisoners to ask them about the best approach for raising a daughter who's largely grown up in his absence.
الأفراح والمناسبات والأعياد والجمعة التي أثرت أنا لما أشوف الأولاد مع آبائهم في الأعياد أو غيره أغثي وأبكي لأنني لا أوجد معي.
وأقواتهم وأرزاقهم فيه تعظيم لحركاتهم لمسيرتهم العلمية لطموحاتهم، وتعاني ما تعاني من الويلات ومن الأمور السلبية والانعكاسات السلبية على هذا السجين الذي هم أملهم ومصيرهم ومستقبلهم وحياتهم.
Fahd has done everything in his power to prevent the prison from claiming it complete. He's taught himself English fluently. He writes to the prison administration for new educational materials. He's reviewing the GED books, all in an effort to prepare himself for the moment when he's released. Fahd is someone with incredible ambition and potential, and he feels the sting of lost opportunity and lost chances. So he's looking for that moment when he returns to Yemen so that he can begin providing for his wife, for his daughter. He wants to work, he wants to go back to school. His
ومن ثم نقوم نحن بالتعاون معه من حيث أن يتم دراسته الجامعية في أي كلية يرغب فيها أو مادة يرغب فيها، حتى ونقف معه نساعده بكل ما نستطيعه بأموالنا بأوقاتنا بجهودنا حتى يقفوا على قدميه.
لكن إن شاء الله قبل أن أنا أعيش سيكون ما شاء الله الأرض لا يخرج نعيش في الدنيا سوا ونبقى سوا ونجعل حق أمنياتنا والحمد لله كل عزم خارج في الدنيا عزم كلها إن شاء الله.
كل المشاكل الذي عانى أخي في غوانتنامو وفي السجن كل هذه المشاكل والصعاب والآلام والاستفزازات وكل ما حصل له في السجن يجب عليه هو نفسه أن يقابل ذلك بماذا؟ بفارق الصبر.
I will die from this. I will die because just emotion. في هذا سأفرح وأكاد أن أموت معه لأني أشترك في الليل وأريد أن أشاركه أفراحه وأحزانه وأعرف عنه كل شيء.
أول لحظة لا أستطيع أن أتخيل ما سأكون به في شدة فرحي وسروري بقدومه. أظن أنني سأتلقاه بالحب وأوقف له يمكن براس الأسفل وأعمل على ظهري وأجري به بين الناس إذا استطعت ذلك.
Slideshows.
Okay, so the good news is that Fahad was actually, as I mentioned earlier, he was resettled. He was sent to Oman in January 2016 after 14 years of being held at Guantanamo. And the government never charged him with a crime. They never told him why he was detained, why he was held, why he was kept apart, from his family for 14 years of kind of the most kind of important years of his life. But he was resettled and he's in Oman now. We actually heard from him a few months ago. He's working on building his life back after this 14 years of being detained. So as I go through this presentation, I want you to maybe just keep Fahad's story and keep his family and keep him in the back of your mind, because a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be kind of just like the history and the politics and the law as it relates to Guantanamo. But ultimately, the people who have suffered and the greatest impact of this regime of Guantanamo are people like Fahad and his family and his community. So Guantanamo opened in 2002, and the reason it was opened was following the 9/11 attacks. The government said we needed a place to detain what are called enemy combatants. Right now, enemy combatants was a new legal category of people that was created post 9/11 to deal with people in a certain way. Right, so there's this fictional category of combatants created that the government said they captured on the battlefield in Afghanistan or other parts of the Middle East and Asia and Southeast Asia. And Guantanamo was a detention center that was opened up, because it existed, it's a naval base in Cuba, but it was opened up to house these people who were captured. And it was designed to be a prison beyond the law, right? It was a prison where US law did not apply, international law did not apply, and it was a place that courts, US courts could not intervene because the people, everyone held at Guantanamo, with the exception of one person, was not a US citizen. And Guantanamo is not technically on US territory. It's in Cuba, but it's a military base, so there's like a special legal regime that applies to naval bases that are not in US territory. So just from the beginning, just like the space of Guantanamo was meant to be a space that was beyond the reach of US law and beyond the reach of US courts. A little bit about the numbers. So as you can see up here, at its peak, Guantanamo held about 780 detainees. And 22 of those detainees were children when they arrived at Guantanamo. Now, 739 have been transferred out, so they've been resettled to different countries or sent back to their home country. And more people have died in custody than have been convicted, right? So 9 people died while being detained at Guantanamo, and only 8 people were convicted of a crime. Now, 41 men remain, and about half of them have been what are called, they've been detained previously in what are called CIA black sites, right, which I'll get into a little bit later. So they've gone from CIA detention in different parts of the world, and now they're in Guantanamo. And so from 2002 to 2017, they've now been in the prison for 15 years. 5 of the men that are there are cleared for release. And what that means is that the government, the men who are cleared for release, these are men who the government has determined that they don't pose a security threat, but the Obama administration simply failed to resettle them, failed to kind of negotiate a deal with a third-party country to resettle them before the clock ran out. So these are men essentially who the government has decided don't pose any threat, don't pose any security threat, but because of kind of bureaucratic inefficiency, we weren't able to resettle them before the new administration came in. And when in Fahad's story, when Omar, his attorney, was talking about Fahad being cleared for release in 2007 and 2009, that meant that since 2007, the government had determined that Fahad doesn't pose any security threat. Like the 6 or 7 national security agencies that were listed up there had all said that this person is no longer a threat and he should be released. But again, because of the different bureaucracies and like the processes that involved in transferring detainees out of Guantanamo, he sat there, for an extra 8-9 years. Of the men that remain, 10 have been charged by military commission. So of the 41 men there, 10 are men that the government has actually presented with charges and said, these are the crimes that we're accusing you of. And the military commissions are basically special military courts that the government set up specifically to deal with post-9/11 detainees. And 26 of the men who remain there are what are called forever prisoners. These are prisoners who the government cannot charge, does not intend on charging with a crime, but the government also cannot release them. And one of the reasons why the government cannot release them, we'll get into a little bit later, but one of the reasons is that because many of these men were tortured, and the government does not want them being released because it fears that they will talk about their torture, and that is something that the government thinks is threatening to national security. So those are just some of the numbers. Now, I guess the question arises, how did these men get here? So the vast majority of the men who were ever held at Guantanamo, so of the 780 men who were held at Guantanamo, the vast majority were sold to the US government by local police agencies and local government officials in different countries such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, and different countries in the Middle East. So what the US government did in the early years of 2002 and 2003 was that it would drop leaflets, such as this one, which, as you can see, it's translated at the bottom, which basically encouraged people to turn over anyone who looked Arab or anyone who looked like he didn't belong in that environment. And the government said, the US government said, if you turn over these people, we'll give you a $5,000 bounty. And
It's like this is Taliban and Al Qaeda guys. I get what you're saying.
Right. No, that's fine. So I'll get into that later. But yeah, you're right. But then the question becomes, how does your average farmer in Afghanistan know if person A was associated with Taliban or Al-Qaeda, right? So that raises the question of who are these men who are really being turned over? And the government has admitted, kind of in different statements, and different administrations have admitted that of the men who were held at Guantanamo, only about 4% of them were actually like engaged in fighting when they were captured. The vast majority of them just happened to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, or happened to look like, resemble someone in this poster, and that's why they were handed over to U.S. authorities. And as I mentioned before, many of the men who eventually ended up at Guantanamo, before they ended up at Guantanamo, many of them were held at what are called CIA black sites. So these were secret prisons that the CIA used to operate in different countries, ranging from Poland to Jordan to Iraq, where they would hold detainees, interrogate them, torture them in some cases, get information that they felt like they needed before handing them over to, or sending them to Guantanamo. So, as this regime of Guantanamo was being developed, and as more and more men were being sent there, the question arose: is this legal? Is this something that the U.S. government can do? And that's kind of during the Bush administration, so the years between 2002 to 2008. The main battle with regard to Guantanamo was getting the law to apply to the prison. Because like as I mentioned in the beginning, this was a prison that was deliberately designed to be completely beyond the reach of any legal regime, international or domestic. And so the struggle that lawyers and human rights advocates had, during the Bush administration was, how do we bring law to a lawless place? And the way that the Bush administration articulated their reasons for why Guantanamo was justified and why it needed to be open, kind of went something like, during this global war on terror that we're engaged in, we need to detain people, and we need to hold them without charging them. We need to hold them without telling them, what crimes that we're going to charge them with. And we need to hold them until this war is over. And we are justified in interrogating them by a variety of means to get information that we need to get from them. And during this whole process, these people don't have rights. And not only do they not have rights, but US courts do not have access to get into this prison and determine what's going on. And one of the big themes of Guantanamo that I'll be coming back to throughout my talk is the theme of secrecy. Because there was different layers of procedures and policies put into place to really control the information that left Guantanamo, but also to control the information that went in. The purpose was, we don't want the world kind of knowing about what is going on here. So we're going to create legal systems and policies and laws to kind of cabin and contain the information that's there. So when, a few months after the first detainees were brought to Guantanamo, CCR filed a lawsuit, basically saying that the main battle or the main argument in the several lawsuits during the Bush administration was that these men who are detained there, they have the right of habeas corpus. And courts should be able to review why these men are detained there. So what is habeas corpus, right? Habeas corpus is probably one of the oldest principles of Anglo-Saxon law, which is very simple, but very, very important. And what it says is that if the government detains you, if the government decides to put you in prison, you have the right to go in front of a judge and ask the government why it's detained. And the government needs to answer why and tell you, and tell the judge, and tell the court why it's detained. So this is, all the legal cases that I'm about to talk about. This is the only right that we were seeking for detainees held at Guantanamo. We wanted the government to bring these men into court and to tell these men why they were being held. So between 2004 and 2008, there were 3 major Supreme Court cases. This was kind of like the high point in terms of like legal activity and lawyers really being involved with Guantanamo and really pushing for more rights, pushing for access. 2004 to 2008 were kind of like the high. So it started with the first case, which was Rasool versus Bush. And in that case, the court ruled that detainees can legally challenge their detention in US courts. So the Supreme Court said that the men who are currently being held at Guantanamo, they have the right to ask the government why they're being held. And this was hugely important. This was a very important case because after this case, for the first time, lawyers actually had access to Guantanamo, actually had access to the men. This was the first. This was kind of like, you know, the doors of the prison were opening a little bit, where finally people from the outside world got to go in and talk to the men and boys who were there and ask, you know, just start getting to ask them what happened, why they were there, just starting to get to know them. So what CCR did after this decision was organize what's called the Guantanamo Habeas Bar, which was basically a group of like hundreds of lawyers from very different kind of parts of the legal profession. So there was human rights lawyers, but there were also lawyers who worked at corporate law firms, there were advocates, there were people who were criminal defense lawyers, so, you know, a variety of different lawyers kind of got together and organized and decided to, in a systematic way, start figuring out how do we bring the Constitution and how do we bring international law into this prison. Congress responded to this decision in 2004 by passing a statute which basically, again, kind of rolled back everything that the Supreme Court guaranteed, basically saying that no, these detainees don't have a right to challenge their detention. What we're going to do, however, is set up special courts for these men. 2006 comes along, and you know, lawyers, we challenge these special courts because they were so deficient, right? In terms of the basic guarantees that the Constitution provides, these special tribunals that Congress had set up were very, very inadequate. So we challenged these special tribunals. And in 2006, in Hamdan v. Rumsfeld, the Supreme Court held that, yes, indeed, these special tribunals, they violate US domestic and international law, and therefore they need to be deconstructed. And the court said, once again, these detainees need to have access to US federal courts. Congress responds again, trying to roll back the Supreme Court decision, and this time passing the Military Commissions Act, which again, in a different way, tries to limit the access that these men have to courts in the US. Finally, in 2008, the Supreme Court decides what was kind of known as like the biggest case in Guantanamo legal history, Boumediene, where the Supreme Court affirmatively said that the habeas corpus provision of the Constitution applies to these men, which basically means that these men have the right, that Congress cannot take away, these men have the right to get into US courts and ask the government why they're being held. And the government either needs to charge them with a crime or the government needs to let them go. So after, you know, this was a huge decision. After this decision, the legal community, human rights advocates, people were really happy because we thought finally the law has been brought into Guantanamo, everything's gonna be okay, the prison's gonna shut down, these men are gonna be relocated or they're either gonna be charged. But this kind of black hole, this legal black hole is no longer going to exist. So then President Obama comes into office, and you know, if we say that during the Bush administration, our struggle as lawyers and advocates was to bring the law to Guantanamo, during the Obama administration, our challenge was, how do we get this law to actually mean something? How do we get this law to actually translate into real consequences and real rights for the men who are held there? And you know, by 2008, by that time, both Obama and McCain and even President Bush were all saying that Guantanamo needs to be shut down. So there was this, you know, there was kind of like this universal consensus across the political spectrum that this prison is contrary to human rights norms, contrary to legal norms. It's harmful to US security interests, and therefore it needs to be shut down. But the question is, how do we go about doing that? So on his second day in office, President Obama, he signed 2 executive orders. The first executive order said that within a year, he's going to close Guantanamo. The first executive order said he's going to close Guantanamo within a year, and the second executive order said that torture is illegal. Now, torture, according to international law and even US law prior to the Bush administration, was universally accepted as an illegal practice. But during the Bush administration, it was revived and kind of, and the law was molded to allow certain practices that now we look back and say definitively were torture. So President Obama came in and said, we're not going to engage in these practices anymore, practices such as waterboarding, et cetera, and that's illegal. So he signed these two very important but largely symbolic executive orders. But here we are in 2017, and Guantanamo is still open, and there's still 41 men who remain there. So what went wrong, right? Like, Obama came in really strong, saying this is a prison that needs to be shut down. There was kind of a universal consensus, but something happened in the intervening 8 years, and the prison was not shut down. I think there's kind of two main reasons why President Obama was unable to shut the prison down. So the first big thing was early on in his administration, he failed to resettle a lot of those men to the U.S. So initially there was a deal being worked out that kind of everyone agreed with, that some of these men were going to be brought to the U.S. and resettled there. That deal leaked, Congress got wind of it, and there was immense pushback to where Congress basically passed a law saying there will not be any detainees settled in the U.S. Now that's a problem, because if the U.S. was not going to be willing to take these men into the U.S., other countries that we were trying to send these men to would also look at us and say, well, if you're not taking these men, why should we take these men? So it made the issue of moving these men out of Guantanamo much more difficult. And the other thing is that President Obama, in the course of his terms in office, he signed. So every year, the Congress passes the defense budget, right, which allocates money to certain defense agencies, and Guantanamo falls within that budget. So each year, Congress will put more and more restrictions on the transfer of Guantanamo detainees into this defense budget. So, and President Obama would sign off on this budget every year, to where it got to a point where there was a complete ban on transfers to the U.S. There was a complete ban on transfers to Yemen, and the majority of men who were at Guantanamo initially and up till this day were from Yemen. So Congress said none of these men can be sent back to Yemen. And it really made it much more difficult to even send men out to third countries that were willing to take them. So we see Congress, legislating in a way that makes it extremely difficult for men to be relocated, and President Obama signing off on these restrictions. And the second thing that happened in the Obama administration was the creation of what's called the law of indefinite detention, right? So remember, I talked about that 2008 case where the Supreme Court said that these men could come into US courts and ask the government why they're being held. So when they did that, the Obama administration and the Justice Department would say that the president has authority to hold, the president has the power legally, the law allows him to hold these men forever, potentially, and not only can we hold them forever, but we can hold them without telling them why we're holding them. And the problem with this is that it's a violation of the way international law is structured, and we can kind of get into the details if anyone's interested in the Q&A. So it's a violation of international law, but because the Obama administration lawyers took this position repeatedly, every time there was a Guantanamo case that was brought to court, the Obama administration said, we have the power to hold these men. Legally, the Constitution and the international law gives us the power to hold these men without telling them what they did wrong, so we're going to keep on doing that. So even though Obama promised to close the prison, his lawyers were going into court, arguing something quite the contrary. And so this notion of indefinite detention became more and more hardened, right? It became more and more, there was law created around it, there was a whole kind of structure built around indefinite detention, legitimizing it and making it that much harder to enact policies that allowed these men to be transferred. And the second point is, so, kind of thinking about what indefinite detention means practically, This is a CCR client, Ali Al-Bihani, who was transferred out of Guantanamo on January 17, 2017. So literally 3 days before he could have potentially been stuck there for the next 4 to 8 years. And so what indefinite detention means in the context of a client like this is that the government would, in Ghalib's case, the government would come to court and the government would say that, we have the power to hold Ghalib because of what he did. And then our lawyers would ask, well, what are you saying he did? What are you saying that our client is accused of? And the government would say, well, his crime is that he was an assistant cook in a kitchen or in a guest house where fighters for the Taliban used to pass through. So because he was an assistant cook in this guest house, he was assisting these fighters. Therefore, he's an enemy combatant. Therefore, we can hold him until this global war on terror is over. So, and these types of arguments were not uncommon, right? Like when we pressed the government to tell us, what are you charging these men with? It was usually things such as what Ghalib did, right? Like staying in a guest house or traveling on a particular road in Afghanistan that fighters were known to travel. And then, so this regime is, every time the government is going into court making these arguments, and this legal regime is getting stronger and stronger. And the second thing is that, remember when I told you earlier, Obama came into office and said that we're outlawing torture, right? No more torture is going to happen. And he acknowledged that while we did that in the past, moving forward, we're not going to do it anymore. However, he failed to prosecute people for torture that was committed. So he acknowledged that there was torture committed, and many of the men at Guantanamo were tortured. And the Senate released a 6,000-page classified report, 600 pages of which were declassified. So that's what these black marks are. The public can only see what's not blacked out. And the Senate really looked into the torture program that the CIA ran, and found that there was actually torture that happened. But the Obama administration refused to hold accountable people who were responsible for torturing many of the detainees in Guantanamo. And without that accountability, it made it that much harder for these men to seek justice. So kind of fast forward to the first 2 years of Obama's administration, 67 people were transferred out of Guantanamo, so a fairly rapid pace. However, by the end of his term, so between 2011 and 2013, only 4 men were transferred out. And the reason for this kind of slowdown of transfers was, as I mentioned, Congress was passing legislation that made it harder and harder. Politically, there was like a divide between Congress and President Obama, and ultimately Congress kept moving out. So it got to a point where the men at Guantanamo were kind of just so despondent and really frustrated by the lack of movement that in the summer of 2013, they launched a hunger strike. So about 106 out of the 166 men who were currently there went on hunger strike to raise awareness about their plight, right? To force people to remember them. And the response from the government and from the guards at Guantanamo was to engage in force feeding, which is a very painful procedure, and to punish them. So to send the men who were hunger striking to solitary confinement and to restrict their freedom and movement even more. However, because the situation got so desperate, it forced the Obama administration and the world community to take notice. And so after that, we saw some more movement again in transferring men out. So Obama appointed a special envoy at the State Department and the Defense Department to actually, this person's job was to help transfer these men. He lifted that ban on transfers to Yemen. So a lot of the Yemeni detainees were able to, be sent back to Yemen once they were cleared for release. And he set up like a review process within Guantanamo whereby these men were reviewed, cleared, and then resettled. But it's important to note that, when we think about the role that the law and the legal system and the courts have played in helping these men be transferred, not a single person was transferred because of an order issued by the court. right? Because, and I can get into this maybe in the Q&A, but during the Obama administration, because of this law of indefinite detention, the courts were extremely deferential to what the government said. So basically that means that if the government came to the court and said, you know, this person is dangerous for X, Y, Z reason, rather than asking the government to present evidence and tell, you know, why are you saying this person is dangerous, give us evidence, you know, show us why this person should not be released, the court said, okay, if the government is saying this person is dangerous, he must be dangerous. We're not going to ask them for more evidence, we're just going to allow this person to be detained. So that's why the courts literally issued 0 writs of habeas corpus or orders saying that these men cannot be charged and must be released. Rather, all the transfers that have happened in Guantanamo up until today have been because of the president and his national security agencies, you know, through their own internal procedures saying, okay, these people are not dangerous, we're going to release them. But in terms of like the excitement that we had in 2008 after that big Supreme Court decision, really thinking that the courts were going to step in and, you know, do something, the courts have largely been they've largely done nothing. If anything, they've made things worse by sanctioning this regime of the government. And this is Tariq Bauda, which was another CCR client. So he was actually on hunger strike starting in 2007. So he was a long-term hunger striker. So from 2007 until his release in 2016, he was on hunger strike. And by the release, he weighed 74 pounds. So yeah, so you know, and as you can read his own words, but for him, you know, taking control of that last little thing that he actually felt like he could control, which is, you know, the food he puts in his body, like for him that was like an empowered, that was the only way that he could feel empowered in a place where everything else was disempowered. So between 2015 and 2017, the process speeds up a little bit. There's a lot more, you know, there's a few more transfers, and but you know, it came down to the wire. Post November 8, 2017, there was a lot of anxiety about what's going to happen with the men who were remaining, because it was clear at that point that Guantanamo was not going to close, and the fate of these men was really just precarious and uncertain. And for one of our clients, Sufyan Barhoumi, he was cleared for release, meaning the government, all the national security agencies determined this man is not a threat, he's not dangerous, he should be released. But essentially, because of bureaucratic inefficiency, because the Department of Defense is dragging its heels, the Department of State is dragging its heels, the government was unable to find him a third country or a home to send him to. So he now is currently still detained at Guantanamo, even though the government has said that they're not going to charge him with a crime, and the government said that he does not pose a threat to U.S. national security. So where we are today, I guess in some ways we've come full circle, right? Guantanamo is still open. And if you think about the rhetoric and the statements that the incoming Trump administration has made with regards to Guantanamo, things like bringing back torture, bringing back waterboarding, bringing more people into Guantanamo, not releasing anyone, expanding the prison, it kind of seems like we're back in the early days of prison. But maybe one kind of sign of hope, or tiny sliver of hope, is that in early February, there was a draft executive order that was leaked by the Trump administration, basically that laid out some of his policies for Guantanamo. And in that executive order, it said that they want to look into reopening CIA black sites, right? The sites where the government used to torture people. That they want to look into expanding Guantanamo, not closing it down, and not releasing any more people. And when that order was leaked, there was significant pushback against it, not only from the human rights community and organizations like CCR, but also from the intelligence community within the government and from other government officials, congressional members, saying that this is not something we're going to go back to, right? We are not going to go back to torture people. We are not going to go back to indefinite detention and bringing more people in. So, I mean, I think the culture maybe has changed a little bit, especially with regards to Guantanamo, and I think internationally, even to to a certain extent domestically, it's really become a symbol of lawlessness, and internationally especially, it's a symbol of torture, and it's a symbol of extreme human rights abuses, and I think that that helps explain part of why there was such pushback against the Trump administration's proposed policies. So I'll stop there, and there's a lot of things that I didn't cover, but I'm hoping they'll come out in Q&A, and yeah, I'm happy to hear from you guys what you have to say.
Thank you, Noor. So we're going to open it to Q&A, but for those of you who are perhaps came in a bit late, I'm Professor Rodriguez. I am in the criminology program within the Department of Sociology. And this is Noor Zafar, who is from the Center for Constitutional Rights. And for my classes, particularly human rights, sociology of human rights, that has read Guantanamo Diary, I really want you to invoke these parallels that you're seeing here with the story that we have been reading of a former detainee who was released in October of 2016 after 14 years at Guantanamo, but also having been at one of these CIA plant sites formerly and other places like that. Right? So I'd like for us to open this to Q&A. Anyone want to begin? Yes, Evan.
You said that in 2008, the Supreme Court said everybody at the Congress had the same right to keep the program. Yet, the president issued a order saying that.
Okay, I can hear myself now. So, you say in 2008, the Supreme Court said that everybody has the right to habeas corpus. But then the president issued an executive order saying that Guantanamo Bay prisoners don't have that right, essentially. How is that a conflict that exists and no one's really done anything about it yet?
That's a great question, and just to be clear, you're saying the president, you're saying the executive order Trump released, right? When you're saying executive order. Or sorry.
One of them said, I'm not sure if it was Trump because he hasn't been in office long enough, but one of the presidents, you said, issued an executive order saying, or you're talking about the courts and how the president's administration, every time the court wanted to, every time it came up and the president's lawyer said, this person's dangerous, and the court said, okay, we're just going to detain them a bit more. It sounded like that even the prisoners didn't know why they were being detained at that point.
Yeah, okay, now I understand. So yes, so the 2008 decision, in that decision, the Supreme Court said that these men have a right to get into court. It didn't say anything beyond, what are their trials going to look like, what are these hearings going to look like. The Supreme Court simply said the court doors are open to these men, so they can at least, they can have lawyers, and their lawyers can put together a case explaining why these men should be released. So then, under the Obama administration, what the Department of Justice lawyers would argue, basically, is that, number one, these men were too dangerous to be released. And during this time, so these men were bringing cases in DC courts, right? Because those are the only courts that can hear Guantanamo cases. So they would bring these cases into the DC court, and so the government would argue that, okay, the prisoner X we think he's too dangerous to be released, and we have the authority to hold him until the war is over, right? And now normally a court in like a non-Guantanamo proceeding would say to the government, okay, government, so you're saying that prisoner X is really dangerous. Can you present me with some evidence? If you're saying this person's dangerous, the court needs to see on what basis are you saying this person is dangerous. In Guantanamo proceedings, number one, the court was extremely deferential to the president, right? So the legal process, the procedures that were set up specific to Guantanamo cases was that the court would basically accept what the government said at face value and not really question and not really demand that the government use evidence, right? So that's already kind of one thing that makes Guantanamo trials different from other proceedings. And number two, the government's theory was that this war is still ongoing, right? So, because the authority the government has to hold these prisoners is based on one, whatever crimes they committed, and two, the fact that the war is still going on. And the government's definition of what this war is also kept changing, but again, because of the extreme deference that the court was giving, the court would buy the government's story. So an example of this is that, you know, in 2014, officially, we ended our combat operations in Afghanistan. So then a bunch of the detainees who were picked up in Afghanistan came to the court and said, look, President Obama has said we've ended combat operations in Afghanistan, therefore the war is over, therefore I should be released. And the Department of Justice would say, wait, hold on. So even though we said that the war is officially over, Afghanistan is still really dangerous, it's really unstable, there's still a lot of fighting going on, so technically it's still sort of like a war zone. So we should continue to hold these men. And the courts would say, okay, you know, so it was a combination of both the courts essentially abdicating their responsibility, essentially saying we're not going to challenge the government because this is a national security space, and then the government coming up with these really, you know, these arguments that really twisted the meaning of basic facts almost. So I think that's why, even though you had this decision that said theoretically, you know, courts should be able to release these men, in practice, that's not what the courts did.
What type of access do lawyers get to detainees in Guantanamo? Like, how often are they going to court?
Great. So, yeah, remember how I said in the beginning, kind of the overarching theme is secrecy, right, when it comes to Guantanamo. And that secrecy extends to lawyers and kind of what type of access we're allowed to have. So the government's theory is that every word that a Guantanamo detainee says is is presumptively classified, meaning that these words, the government has determined that everything that these detainees say possibly could pose a threat to national security. Therefore, before these men's words can get out, they need to be screened. So the government needs to screen them and declassify them. So what this means for lawyers is that, number one, in order to be able to meet with Guantanamo detainees or in order to be able to speak with them, we need what's called security clearance, right? We need to go through this process that can take anywhere from, you know, I don't know, 5 to 12 months, where the government kind of really looks into our background and decides whether or not they want to give us access to the detainees. So once we get security clearance, then we're allowed to meet with detainees. So that allows us to meet with them and to speak with them. But if I wanted to, like, let's say I have a client at Guantanamo and I wanted to, I'm working on developing a case for this person and I wanted to talk to them and get some facts. I can't just pick up my phone and call that person, right? I need to go down to what's called a secure facility, which is like this secure location near DC. And that's the only place that I can make a call to Guantanamo to speak with my client who's detained. And then thirdly, so let's say I call I go down to the secure facility and I call my client. And, you know, during the call, I'm taking notes, right? I'm writing down what he's telling me. I can't just pick up my notes and then walk outside and, you know, start typing up these notes on my computer. I have to submit my notes for what's called declassification review. So essentially, I have to submit my notes to a government censor who's going to read my notes and decide if anything should be classified, meaning, you know, what am I allowed to say to the public and what am I not allowed to say to the public. And that's kind of really, I mean, the basis of an attorney-client relationship is attorney-client privilege, right? Which basically means that whatever conversation I have with my client, the government or any other person is not allowed to know that information unless I give them that information. But this regime of, you know, declassifying, essentially, you know, I have to hand over my notes to the government. So now the government has access to everything I've talked about with my client. So And this goes to the point of, really containing what information leaves the prison and then what information goes in. So let's say if I'm going to Guantanamo next week and I want to take a copy of this book, or if I want to take a copy of Guantanamo Diary to my client, I have to submit this book to a government declassification person a few weeks before I go down there. This person's gonna, read through the book and decide if there's anything that needs to be classified and edit it out before I can, hand that book to my client to read. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, in terms of what it means to represent a person that the government thinks poses like a national security threat. It's every single thing that they say is thought to be dangerous, so it needs to be censored by the government. And that really, I mean, the practical impact of that is that, that really prevents these men's stories from getting out. And so that's why when it comes to Guantanamo, we have a very government-heavy narrative, right? Because the government is the only one who really has access to everything. And so they're able to really shape the stories about these men, shape the stories about this prison, whereas those men are essentially silenced in a way, right? Like they're only allowed to speak in very limited terms, and everything they say has to go through the government, has to go through their lawyers to get out in public. So that really has a big impact on the way that we're able to tell their stories.
This is kind of multifaceted, but with the issue of renditions and having people extradited and taken to different countries, and then also the concept of having, like you were talking about, international law versus US law, which was, like I said, changed. So the rhetoric would make everything legal, hypothetically speaking. So at this point, where does jurisdiction fall, or how is that being handled in terms of having the cases handled, I guess, to what happened before legally and like retroactively going back and kind of addressing situations, but also just in terms of, you're saying in this case, I understand with Guantanamo, the US has the overarching ability to have governmental power or jurisdiction over it, but with men who are taken or extradited from this country, or from other countries, like different places, how does that play in a factor?
So I guess so. Yeah, there's two parts to your question. The first is, if I understand correctly, like, do the men who were extradited and rendered, do they have any rights in U.S. courts, right?
Also, in terms of the U.S. courts even have the U.S. courts even have the jurisdiction to oversee these cases because they were, I guess, under even the international law, it was illegal to do that. Hypothetically, but the way the U.S. framed the rhetoric of the law, they said that because there was no evidence to support torture being used in these areas, we could still do it, which is flimsy when you're talking about the UN, like the Convention Against Torture. But so I'm just trying to figure out how that is being addressed today, and I guess kind of just going with all those factors playing in, who gets to do what.
Yeah. So the short answer to your question is it's not addressed today. And kind of fleshing that out a little bit. So you're right in that so men who were, let's say, like if someone was grabbed in Iraq and sent to a special CIA prison in Poland, and let's say this person was tortured there, U.S. courts don't have access to that because U.S. courts you either have to be on U.S. territory or you have to be a U.S. resident or a citizen or a green card holder or something. You have some connection to the U.S. So these men were non-citizens, had never been to the U.S. Were not held in the U.S. So U.S. courts don't really have jurisdiction over these men. International court, so internationally, torture is illegal, right? And that's what's called like just a customary norm of international law. It's something that's non-negotiable. But who's really going to hold U.S. officials accountable, right? Are we going to bring the people who designed a torture program in front of the International Criminal Court? Are we going to bring them to the European Court of Human Rights? And that's what, there's a lot of politics involved, right? Like no international tribunal is going to put out an arrest warrant for George Bush or for Dick Cheney or for the head of the CIA. And so the last hope for these men was to try to hold some of the people who engaged in torture accountable in the US court, right? But as I mentioned, President Obama prevented that from happening. While he acknowledged that we tortured people, while he acknowledged that we're not going to do it again, he didn't say we need to hold these men, hold these government officials who did engage in torture accountable. And US courts, when we have brought cases to try to hold, for example, a lot of the torture was done by contractors, right? So these are private companies who the Department of Defense or who the CIA would pay to do torture or to conduct interrogations and use, techniques that involve torture. So, we bring lawsuits trying to hold accountable these third parties, these contractors. The courts unanimously have thrown those cases out of court. And then when we try to hold actual government officials accountable, there's a whole body of law called official immunity and state secrets and national security privileges. There's all these exceptions to who you can and cannot sue and hold accountable. And there's a big chunk of US law that basically says that you cannot hold US government officials accountable even when they violate international law. So I guess that's kind of, a long way of saying that there has been no accountability for torture.
Although there was pushback when Trump, the Trump administration rather, tried to reinforce some of the measures that had previously rolled back, since Guantanamo is the crown jewel of our war on terror, and like you said, the war on terror is abstract and ever changing. What's the future for CCR as it pertains to Guantanamo?
So we currently are representing, we still have about 6 clients who are still detained in Guantanamo, and we're going to continue representing them. And your question raises like another question, which is what does it mean to represent a client when you know you're going to lose in court, right? When you know this person's not going to be released, and especially now under the Trump administration, that even there's no way, even outside of the courts, even the president and kind of that review mechanism is not going to lead to anyone being released. So then it's like, as a lawyer, how do you seek justice for your client? And I think that's where the role of, beyond just the courts, where the role of advocacy comes in, where the role of videos like this and the role of Guantanamo Diary and other books and articles and things that have been written about the detainees or by the detainees, like that's really what's the most powerful tool of advocacy kind of in this environment, because the law is a dead end, essentially, right? Like we can file cases and we can kind of annoy the court and annoy the administration and really push them to do something. But ultimately, if we really want like a bigger policy shift, it's gonna happen through changing the narrative around Guantanamo and allowing these men's stories and voices to get out. Because again, the narrative around these men is that they're too dangerous. If we release them, they're going to cause harm to the U.S. And there's no way to get around that unless we allow these men to speak for themselves. So I think with regard, when it comes to what organizations like CCR and others do, I think we continue to do our legal challenges and we continue to find ways that the law can make benefit our clients. But a lot of our effort also comes down to thinking of creative ways to tell these men's stories and make sure that their stories are still out there and not kind of forgotten.
So I have 2 questions, one short one. Why Yemen? Why was that a specific target of the legislation? And then my other question is, do you think this is the leading edge of sort of a deterioration of the rule of law in the United States? And just how this has been playing out?
Yeah, so with regard to the first question, so the ban on transfers to Yemen actually came about in 2010 after the Christmas underwear bomber, because news came out that before he came back to or tried to come back to the U.S., he was in Yemen. And then once that bit of the story came out, Congress immediately said, we're not sending anyone back to Yemen. And so that was 2010, and now currently, the country is so destabilized because of the different types of proxy wars going on there that kind of ban on Yemen transfers continues to hold. So, after 2010, Yemeni detainees were not sent back to Yemen. We had to find other countries to send them to. And with regard to Guantanamo being kind of the cutting edge of the deterioration of the rule of law, I think in a way that's true, but I think perhaps the more sinister or the more dangerous implications of Guantanamo is that we've seen the underlying policies and frameworks and perspectives that animated a place like Guantanamo to open and to continue to be open. We see those now creeping into domestic U.S. criminal law, domestic U.S. national security law. So, one example I can share, for concrete policy is that, Guantanamo is a prison, like I said, it's shrouded in secrecy, right? No information really gets out, no information really gets in. And similarly, we have in the domestic criminal justice system, domestic prison system, we've essentially post 9/11, in the framework of this global war on terror, counterterrorism policies, we've created what are these things that are known as special administrative measures, which are extremely restrictive conditions of confinement that apply to prisoners who have been convicted of terrorism-related charges, so material support, for example. And what SAM's special administrative measures are is it's basically solitary confinement. So an individual who's been convicted of a terrorism-related charge, right? And when I say terrorism-related charge, I think it's important to be clear. Someone who's been convicted under what's known as the material support statute. The material support statute basically says that, an example of one of our clients, if you're living in an apartment in London, and one day your friend comes over and he wants to store his rain boots in your apartment, right? You let him do that. A few years later, it turns out that the friend who stored his rain boots in your apartment was associated with a liar. You can be charged with material support, which basically means that because you let your friend store his rain boots in your apartment, you were supporting terrorism. Therefore, we're going to use this material support prosecution to lock you up for a minimum of 25 years, right? And our client, Fahad Hashmi, if you want to, if you're interested in more about the case, that's exactly the facts on which he was convicted. So Fahad Hashmi was convicted, and then pre-trial, so before he was even charged, similar to people at Guantanamo, before the government even said this is what we're charged, this is what we're going to, pre-trial meaning before he actually had a trial, right? Before he was convicted of an actual crime by a jury, the government held him in pre-trial detention under SAMs, special administrative measures. SAMs so he was held in a jail in Manhattan in solitary confinement for 23 hours out of 24 hours of the day. He was not allowed to write. He was allowed 2 phone calls per month, 2 15-minute phone calls per month to his mother, his father, and his sister, I believe, so only immediate family members. He was allowed to write 1 letter, not longer than 3 pages, only to his immediate family members per month. And they were allowed, if they wanted to actually come visit him in person, they could only do so, I think it was 2 or 3 days out of the month, and they met through a thick plexiglass, so there was no contact. And if we wanted to, as his lawyers, if we wanted to talk to him, the FBI or a government agency would be listening on the phone. So we had no kind of confidentiality, similar to Guantanamo, where everything was screened out. So you see like similar elements of the regime of secrecy that we put in place in Guantanamo now is coming back home and impacting our criminal justice system broadly. And that's just one example. There's many other ways in which policies that are kind of based on kind of generalized notions of who poses the threat and how we deal with that threat in a preventative way before crime happens. That's really coming back into our criminal justice system and impacting it in a very concerning way.
I have a question raised by a student in class actually that may relate with it. So we saw the image that you had of a flyer, right, providing kind of a financial incentive to turn over anyone who may be related to Guantanamo. In the Guantanamo diary book that we've been reading, there's a Mauritanian man who was was held without charge, who was given to the US by foreign Canadian police. And a lot of the students wanted to know whether or not, or what was the incentive, were there any kind of financial incentives for governments to actually participate and offer up their own citizens? Because one point of one grievance that Slavi had, who wrote the book, was that why would my government give me up without having any evidence, no evidence from the US, no charge, and they don't believe that I participated? So was there any incentive given by the US to countries to actually participate and send their own citizens?
Yeah, I think we could call it an incentive or we could call it a threat. I think it depends on how we frame it, but certainly I think a lot of the countries that were complicit in this rendition regime, this regime of sending people to either CIA black sites and ultimately Guantanamo, a lot of these governments were small, weak governments that had no choice but to give in to US demands, to hand over certain individuals that the US was interested in. And I think that's just where the kind of power dynamics of international politics really comes in. It's like a country like Mauritania is not, it's not going to stand up to the United States, right? And we saw that especially in Pakistan, right? Which was a country that, prior to 9/11 was fairly stable, right? But now it's like every other day in the news, there's a suicide bomb, right? It's because the government, kind of the US impressed upon the Pakistani government that you need to cooperate with us. And what cooperation meant was that there were certain factions in this already very kind of fraught political dynamic where you have different groups with different interests. If the government starts targeting one group of people because the US is telling you to target those people, that inflames kind of underlying tensions, and that's how you get kind of the instability that you have today. So I think there were incentives and kind of it was impressed upon certain governments that you need to cooperate with the US because either the aid that we give you, the monetary aid or the military aid we give you is at stake, or something more. So I think that definitely played out in the kind of international context.
All right, big round of applause, please.
So I actually forgot this. So one of our clients, Walid, whose picture, who I told you, who's the one who was resettled in January 17, he, while he was detained in Guantanamo, he actually became a very prolific artist. So I brought some. We literally have hundreds of paintings and drawings by him. So I brought just a few. So if you're interested at taking a look at them, I'll kind of spread them out on this table. And just an interesting thing to note is that you'll see on the back of these paintings, there's a little stamp that says approved by US forces, and it has a date and a bunch of numbers. So remember when I said everything that goes in needs to be, screened, and everything that comes out needs to be screened. So literally when Walid wanted to give us his paintings, he had to give them to a government censor. The government censor had to look at it, determine that this painting didn't pose a national security threat, stamp it, and then we were allowed to have them. So I'll lay them out here if you want to look at them. They're beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
We do have a few more minutes. The class period is over, but if you would like to come up and speak for any reason, we have about 10 more minutes.
Signing sheet is in the front. I think Johnson just gave it in.
Okay.